Seth Little was still in high school in Indianapolis in the early 90s when one day he went on a shopping trip with his dad.
We had just moved, and we went to this kind of high-end audio-visual store at a time when that was kind of a novel thing in and of itself.
This was 1993. Back when CDs were still relatively new, the internet was barely a thing, and smart homes only existed in science fiction. Seth's dad wanted a stereo for their new house, but when they walked in, it was something else that caught Seth's eye.
I will never forget, they had Jurassic Park up on a big screen and probably 20 speakers in the room. And they chose the moment with the water glass and the ripple. And that almost literally blew my hair back.
We all know the scene. The one where the footsteps of an approaching T-Rex make terrifying ripples in a glass of water. But it wasn't the surround sound of those footsteps that got Seth excited. It was something else.
On a table to the side of the room were a few copies of Audiovisual Interiors magazine, which was this super nerdy publication that was mainly about like whole house audio systems. But they would regularly also go into whole house automation and like house as a system and, things like lighting setups for different scenes and controlling your blinds to manage temperatures and even like kind of early smart thermostats.
For a kid whose dad was a home builder, the idea that a house could be more than just rooms and walls was revolutionary.
And I geeked out on that so hard. I was fascinated by the idea that your home could be this kind of single integrated system that you could control and manage to kind of better support how you wanted to live.
That moment, more than 30 years ago now, set Seth on a path to explore smart home concepts that eventually led him to the front lines of the energy transition.
I spent a lot of time through kind of high school and even early college thinking about the potentials of what it would be like to kind of live in that sort of environment.
Today, Seth designs programs that make homes smarter, more efficient, and responsive to the needs of a rapidly changing electric grid.
We could go deep on the energy transition, but we're at a time where, utility rates are higher than they've been. People are conscious of their costs. And at the same time, how we use energy is really important. So we help people use less energy. We help people shift to more sustainable uses of energy.
This is With Great Power, a show about the people building the future grid today. I'm Brad Langley. Some people say utilities are slow to change, that they don't innovate fast enough. And while it might not always seem like the most cutting-edge industry, there are lots of really smart people working really hard to make the grid cleaner, more reliable, and customer-centric. This week, I'm talking to Seth Little, Director of Market Development and Partnerships at CLEAResult, one of North America's largest energy efficiency implementation firms. Seth's job is to help utilities design programs that get customers to use less energy and save money on their bills.
I genuinely believe that the energy transition is the defining moment of our time, and we're here to help. We actually try to keep it simple. Our tagline even is we change the way that people use energy, but really we're just trying to help people be more efficient and spend less money on their utility bills.
Seth has some really provocative ideas about how the industry approaches efficiency. He argues that your attic insulation is actually a grid-responsive asset and that we need to rethink how utilities use customer data to target programs. We talked about how the industry's focus on digital solutions might be overlooking some of the most cost-effective ways to make homes more efficient. But first, Seth told me how he went from a fascinated teenager to someone who's actually designing home programs.
I just always felt natively comfortable in anything around the built environment and construction. And so I think I ended up, even as I kind of searched around in youth for the thing that was going to define a professional career, the places I always felt most comfortable were areas where I was, working with contractors or thinking about design or ways to, turn design into a reality.
And is there a point that you realized that this interest could become part of your professional life? Was there kind of an aha moment?
The click really came. I was working for kind of a regional contractor, and we actually ended up receiving an energy audit from the Redwood Coast Energy Authority. And it was then that I learned that there was this entire industry around helping customers make wise use of energy, kind of fundamental to the way they worked. And I had no idea that this could be a profession. And I knew that I understood how building systems worked, and I knew that I had a passion for kind of sustainable approaches for living. And to see those two come together in a moment definitely had, if you will, a light bulb moment for me.
Energy audits aren't always seen as the sexy thing in the energy transition. So, why were you so drawn to that type of work?
I think it was learning that there was a profession that helped people to use less energy, right? Like the fact that our industry even existed, and the fact that there were people out there that were leading a thing called the energy transition, I just took to it immediately.
And so shortly after you joined CLEAResult, so went all in on energy. What drew you to the company?
It was like the universe opened up a little bit. I was job hunting, and I found a posting, and every question was just easy. And then every interaction I had along the way with everybody at CLEAResult just seemed really easy. I was seeking to actually move back to my hometown in Indiana, and CLEAResult was opening the new Indiana office to support the new statewide energy efficiency program, Energizing Indiana. And so I kind of got in on the ground floor of a new regional opening for CLEAResult, and got to really kind of form some new processes for some new program designs, and just fell right in and started running.
And you've held several different positions at CLEAResult over the past 13 years. What's been the main through line for you throughout those positions?
So I got started in operations and got to learn a few different program designs. But since at least 2018, I've been on a few different teams that ultimately have been tasked with kind of identifying standard operating procedures and looking for innovation, right? So CLEAResult has the advantage of being one of the largest implementation firms in North America for energy efficiency and DSM programs. And like the task of our teams has been to find a way to leverage that scale to offer better programs and more efficient energy savings and more cost-effective energy savings for our clients. So I've been privileged enough to be kind of on a few different teams with that sort of a goal.
So your work sits at the intersection of energy efficiency and customer engagement. How have these fields evolved during your career? It feels like there's been a lot of change and advancement. How would you kind of talk through the evolution of efficiency and engagement over the past 13, 15 years or so?
It was near the end, but when I started, I think we were still doing printed PDF applications in the mail, and then please wait 8 to 10 weeks for a paper check. And even then, we knew that the clock was ticking on that. And now we're looking at even the digital always-on solutions, and even instant payments are only just table stakes and are just the beginning of what we need to engage customers.
So one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you is because you've got some kind of compelling opinions that aren't that, I think, widely talked about. One of which is you've described attic insulation as a grid responsive asset, which at the face of it, you're like, huh? So maybe explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I truly believe that energy efficiency is foundational to the energy transition, right? But I mean, think about it. If your attic is well insulated, then in that moment of system peak, your air conditioner isn't working as hard to manage that thermostat set point. And then you can take it another step, right? Like I can't opt out of a demand response event with my insulated attic, right? It is always providing that benefit. Further, the internet doesn't need to be connected for that resource to be provided. And then maybe even more importantly, right? My utility doesn't have to hit the peak with a demand response request to get the benefit to the grid from my insulated attic. And then in many ways, it's cheaper to insulate a bunch of attics than it is to deploy, several new technical systems to be able to provide grid responsiveness.
So why do you think traditional grid flexibility solutions often overlook these more passive measures?
It's interesting. I feel like the whole industry has been moving towards digital solutions, and there have been really good reasons to do so, right? Like the degradation of lighting savings has really pushed cost effectiveness as a primary pressure for utility programs. And I think it has been a natural inclination for all of us to find cost effectiveness in digital systems that are always on. At the same time, customer expectations have been moving towards digital solutions. And so I think it's just an easy slope for us all to be on. But I think that, like given the magnitude of the challenge that we face in the energy transition, I don't think we can afford to be overly selective. No one specific solution is going to get the grid responsiveness that we need, especially in this moment of historic demand, data centers, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency. And so I think, we need energy efficiency first, demand flexibility next. Smart rates are a huge part of that. We need a full set of solutions to be able to get to a responsive grid that's going to carry us into the future.
Has this focus on active over passive measures, has it maybe stunted some of the growth in energy efficiency? Are people focused on the wrong thing, or like are they not as focused on some of those passive measures that are a little bit more cost effective? Has it kind of hampered our energy efficiency efforts at all?
Yeah, I think it has. But, I don't think it's a blind spot. And I think part of it is the innovation that we're seeing in our ability to measure and track program benefit, right? So I think part of the challenge in recognizing the benefit of a well-insulated attic is that your well-insulated attic doesn't have a ones and zeros connection to the grid. Right. But now with advanced metering technology and even, artificial intelligence and the ability to read large data sets, we're getting to the point where we can tell you exactly what the benefit to the grid is from an insulated attic. And so I don't think that people have willfully ignored the contribution that energy efficiency can make to a flexible grid. But I think we're just now getting to the point, with companies like Watt Carbon and Recurve and even ClearResult, since we can document, can measure, and can verify the contribution that we're making to grid responsiveness, I think this opens up kind of a whole new avenue of ways that energy efficiency can support a responsive grid.
And meter data is obviously very important too. So how has the access to high resolution meter data changed your approach to energy efficiency programs?
Yeah, I mean, the easy and most intuitive example is targeting. Right? Like even with a 30-day read, we can identify electric heat customers and electric water heat, right? And once we get higher resolution with the data, we can get much closer, right? We can get down to individual homes and ways that they are impacting the way the grid is functioning. We're getting to the point now when we begin to look at new programs or even new initiatives within a program where we can tell the utility, hey, let's identify the following homes or the following businesses based on meter profiles and target those to achieve the forecasted amount of, kW reduction or energy savings that we want to see.
Yet, I think one of the knocks on AMI 1.0 is that it hasn't really been used to its full extent. Do you hear any anecdotes where utilities are collecting all this data, but not really using it to enable use cases or value? So, if utilities could share more customer usage data, what possibilities would that open up?
The possibilities are huge, right? Literally down to the household level, right? Instead of doing a market potential study that takes 3 years, is vetted by a regulatory body, right? Like, let's just go into the data and identify the, top N% of homes that have an energy intensity above Y and go treat those homes, right? But for us to get to the data, like the math isn't difficult once we have the data, but utilities are naturally risk averse and are very protective, and rightly so, of their customers' privacy and their personal identifiable information. I think where I would seek to challenge the way that the industry thinks about this is whether or not usage data is particularly sensitive, right? I am grateful that my utility keeps my banking and billing and transactional data very private and secure. But is the same requirement as valuable when it comes to my monthly, hourly, minute by minute usage data? I think that the potential for what we could do ultimately far outweighs the risk associated with that data, being used in an unskillful way.
So why do you think that utilities are leery of providing that kind of information? Because I tend to agree. I mean, it's not as though it's PII. I mean, I guess it is classified as such, but is it just their existing way of thinking? Is there something else that gets in their way? Like how can we free up that data to drive more value?
It is interesting, right? Like, I think within the industry, and maybe even because of the fact that utilities are regulated monopolies, that there's not as much of a push for innovation as you might see when there's kind of the threat of competition. So I don't think that, if you're managing risk at a utility, it might be easier to say, hey, we're just going to be really conservative with all of this data. We're going to keep our customers' interest first. And, I don't think anybody is going to push back on that too hard. But, maybe if we could encourage the framing of the thinking to be that, hey, keeping the interest of our customers first might be providing them the most service we can provide, or might be helping them to identify that their HVAC is short cycling, something that we know that we can do from this side of the meter. And so I think, if we really were to open up the aperture on our perception of what the possibilities were, the way that we could serve utility customers through use of that data, and begin to kind of upset the balance of that risk to benefit assessment, I think that's where we might begin to see the movement.
Are there other barriers that are preventing better use of customer data for program design? I feel like I hear a lot about data quality. Sometimes the quality of the data is not fantastic. What other barriers are you seeing?
Yeah, data quality is real. For me, I see that one more as a factor along the way than a true blocker. I'd like to see us pilot more in this area, right? I think, there are great technologies out there where we can literally go house by house. And, let's look at constrained feeders. Let's look at applying data sets to non-wires alternative solutions. Let's identify the 25 houses up the canyon that may also be kind of a resiliency risk, right? Identify their energy consumption patterns, identify measures even before we even step into the home, and then treat those homes, and then white paper the heck out of those benefits, show what's possible, demonstrate the benefit that's out there, and then begin to scale those program designs.
That's interesting because, there's kind of a mentality of death by pilot in this space sometimes. When you think about the goals that we have as part of the transition, pilots alone won't do it. So how do you bridge that gap between pilots and scalability? Any ways you cancel your customers? Like, yes, pilots are good, but unless we scale, we're not going to achieve what we have to achieve. Like, how do you bridge that gap?
I think you build the scalability into the pilot, right? The idea of what we're talking about with large data sets and kind of sophisticated analysis, build into the pilot from the beginning that, hey, we'll do this small because, budget constraints and to give you an opportunity at a low risk test. But then, inherently we can do this at any given size, based on the infrastructure of how you build the pilot. The fact is, most utilities still don't want to go first. And the pilot does seem to be the way to help mitigate the risk on we don't want to go first. But I think if you can build into the design the clear route to scalability, maybe that's the path to be able to deploy at scale.
And have you seen that be successful in your own work? Any examples you have where they kind of built that scalability into the pilot?
So we are working to do that with almost every pilot that we deliver, right? Because, as you cite, this is not a new problem. So I think, when presenting the pilot, showing that roadmap to scalability, it is interesting that many utilities, when they say pilot, really just means small program. And then some don't want to say pilot at all. But I think that if you can provide an entire small program in a box and show how that could also be a large program, I think you're again, it's risk aversion. If you can show a confident way to scale a program from the very beginning, I think you're far more likely to get pilot adoption and then that scale into a full program.
So we call this show With Great Power, which is a nod to the energy industry. It's also a famous Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. So Seth, what superpower do you bring to the energy transition?
When I think about Spider-Man and the enduring value of that story, I actually think that the key there is Peter Parker. And that I think if Peter had a superpower, it was that he was able to rise to a moment that he wasn't expecting and didn't plan for, I think the energy transition is the defining moment of our generation. And if I have a superpower, it's that I was lucky enough to be born during this time and that I'm able to help. And I think, like there's a universe of regular folks out there with maybe exactly that superpower too. And I think, the fact that we can all work together to accelerate and realize the energy transition is something that I value.
Love that answer. Well, Seth, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Brad.
Seth Little is Director of Market Development and Partnerships at CLEAResult. With Great Power is produced by GridX in partnership with Latitude Studios. Delivering on our clean energy future is complex. GridX exists to simplify the journey. GridX is the enterprise rate platform that modern utilities rely on to usher in our clean energy future. We design and implement emerging rate structures, and we increase consumer investment in clean energy, all while managing the complex billing needs of a distributed grid. Our producer is Aaron Hardick. Ann Bailey is our senior editor. Stephen Lacey is our executive editor. Sean Marquand composed the original theme song and mixed the show. The GridX production team includes Jenny Barber, Samantha McCabe, and me, Brad Langley. If this show is providing value for you, and we really hope it is, we'd love it if you could help us spread the word. You can rate and review us to Apple and Spotify, or you can share a link with a friend, colleague, or the energy nerd in your life. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Brad Langley.